This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning this week's shows is Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University livestock economist, with a cattle market update. Beef supplies are tightening as beef production continues to decrease. Londa Nwadike, K-State and University of Missouri Extension Food Safety Specialist, discusses food safety as it relates to direct-to-consumer sales. There are many resources available to producers who are starting or continuing direct-consumer sales. Finishing the show is K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Gerken with information on why people could be seeing dead fish in their ponds. There are things people can do to increase oxygen in their ponds for the fish. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today on this Monday, and we start our Mondays with a cattle market update. And for this week, we have Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Getting started with cash cattle markets, what are they looking like?
Oh, I tell you what, these cattle markets have just been on fire the last couple of weeks, continuing to move up. Cash feeder cattle markets, fed cattle set another new record here in the last week or so. And the feeder cattle are not quite to record levels, but they're going to be there soon at the pace we're going. And so, just across the board, we're seeing a lot of strength in these cattle markets. I think it's probably a combination of obviously the tighter numbers and all of that, but we've also had some improvement in pasture conditions, forage conditions, and that's probably adding even more strength to these lightweight calves in particular.
Do you think this is going to say something that stays on this pace moving into the future?
Well, honestly, it's gone up so much the last couple of weeks. I don't know if we can maintain that pace, but I think it's going to certainly continue to trend up as we go forward. I don't look for sort of the normal seasonal patterns to work. I mean, it depends on what size of cattle, your type of cattle you're looking at. The calves are normally going downhill in the second half of the year to a fall low. I don't think that'll happen this year. Feeder cattle tend to get a little bit higher through the summer anyway, but we're increasing at a faster pace than that. Fed cattle are normally going down to a seasonal low in late summer, Labor Day about, and then go up in the end of the year. I don't think we're going to look back this year. Again, we may not stay on this pace, but I don't think we'll pull back significantly at this point in time.
And Derrell, any speculation as to why that is?
Just, again, the momentum is building, the numbers are tightening, all the pieces are kind of coming together now in terms of, sort of what we've been seeing coming. We've been telling this story for many months now, but it's really happening finally. And I think it's just going to, we're just going to go forward from here and kind of play out that scenario.
Another portion of the cattle market, futures contracts.
Futures markets obviously are quite volatile, and they can do all kinds of things in the short run for various reasons that maybe have nothing to do with market fundamentals. But, they had a pretty big run here for a week or two, pulled back a little bit. But again, that's kind of typical in that trading world where, any sort of big move one way or the other, then typically there'll be a, kind of a breather where the market takes a little breath. But I think given what the cash markets are doing, the market fundamentals, I don't think the futures market is going to pull back significantly more than, again, just kind of taking a little breather.
Sounding like some good news. And something you mentioned beforehand, box beef cutouts were shooting up.
Box beef has been trending higher generally, although, in the very short run, we saw a peak in late April when we were doing Memorial Day buying, and then it kind of dropped through May until we got through Memorial Day. So one of the questions afterwards is, how did Memorial Day go? Was there follow-through demand? What has happened since the 1st of June is that box beef prices have just shot up. In the last week or so, box beef went up from, about $3.06 for choice box beef to a $3.28, the last daily report that I had. So, again, and I think it's tighter supplies is clearly a significant factor, but obviously there has to be demand for the market to be able to sustain those higher prices. So it appears that demand is still very resilient at this point.
And in the article you wrote for your calf corner for Oklahoma State University, it says they've jumped 14.8% for choice box beef, which in my opinion is a pretty big jump.
It is. I mean, again, we've seen a general trend up, and then in particular, this June move. Now we're buying for 4th of July now for Independence Day. So, we go from Memorial Day, but we're always buying 3 weeks to 4 weeks ahead of time at the wholesale level. So we're undoubtedly buying for 4th of July, but nevertheless, the strength in this market reflects the continued decrease in beef production, tighter supplies, but also the fact that there is demand and this market is just remarkably strong at this point.
You've mentioned a turn down in beef production. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because really the only most recent peak was in January.
Yeah, beef production, if you go back last year on an annual basis, we set record levels for beef production, and that was because we were liquidating. We were sort of eating inventory. That's not going to go on indefinitely. Now we are seeing the turn as we get into this year, and the momentum is growing there in terms of slaughter decreasing. Carcass weights have been averaging below a year ago, although most recently they're right about on pace with this time last year, at least for steer carcasses. Cattle carcasses in general, I think, are still a little bit lighter. But, most everything is down. The one thing that I'm watching closely, not only from the standpoint of implications for beef production, but also the flip side of that is what's going on with the cow herd and the inventory, and that's this heifer slaughter. Heifer slaughter has been very large the last 2 years. So far this year, up until this last week, heifer slaughter's still been running a tick above, less than 1%, but, about equal to large levels from last year. But at some point in time, it's going to turn. And that's one of the things I'm watching on a week-by-week basis. This last week's data, the most recent weekly data, showed that heifer slaughter was down. So, that's not enough to be a trend yet, but we watch going forward. We may have finally turned that corner as we go forward, and then pretty much everything's down except for dairy cow slaughter is still running above a year ago for reasons related to the dairy side of things. But overall cattle slaughter is down, and carcass weights have been down most of the year, so beef production continues to fall.
And touching on something was the heifers you mentioned. So slaughter's going down, and I know a while back we talked about that they were culling a little bit harder in their herds, so seeing more retention of heifers?
Well, I think this may be early indications of that. We won't know for a while. The slaughter data will tell us something quicker, but, even slaughter data, of course, there's a lag, right? So whatever we're doing in terms of placing heifers, it's going to be 5 or 6 months after that before it shows up as slaughter. So there's a lag time in the data. But, we did talk about the fact that, a month ago, we still had significant drought, and particularly in the central and southern plains, probably was some continued liquidation at that time. Since then, we've had quite a bit of improvement in moisture conditions in that area. We won't know for a little while yet. I suspect that most of the liquidation has stopped at this point there, and with better conditions, broadly speaking, in the country, I imagine that we're beginning or about to begin heifer retention, but we really won't know that for sure until this fall sometime.
And Derrell, something you mentioned to me before we got started on this was you're actually going to be heading abroad here soon to Ireland and Scotland and focusing on agriculture as a whole. But I think it's important to remember that agriculture in the U.S. is also important to other nations also.
Absolutely. Increasingly we're part of a global market, and specifically in terms of cattle and beef, the U.S., the role that international trade plays is very important to the U.S. And so, this is, we don't necessarily do a lot of trade in cattle and beef specifically with Ireland and Scotland, but in general, particularly from a student perspective, we're excited to take this trip. We'll be looking at a number of agricultural things, some dairy stuff, even fisheries, aquaculture related things, some wool. There's a lot of sheep in parts of this region. And we're going to end up, and the students are really excited about this, as am I, we're going to end up at the end of the trip at the Royal Highland Show in Scotland, which is kind of like a national fair as opposed to a state fair. So there'll be lots of animals, lots of cattle judging and that kind of thing. And that's going to be kind of the cap of our trip will be at the end of it to go and see that stuff.
And Derrell, I went to Ireland with Kansas State University for a study abroad trip, and I think it'll be interesting to see, as I believe that how the beef look and conformation-wise is different than what we see in America. Different
breeds of cattle, different production systems. And so it'll be very interesting to see that, to see the, the production environment that agricultural production takes place in. And one of the things I'm really excited about is we will visit agricultural colleges in both Ireland and Scotland. They're going to, show us some things and show us some of their programs and their research facilities. And they've asked me at both of these, one in Dublin and one in Edinburgh, to present a seminar giving them an overview of the U.S. cattle industry. So they're interested in learning about us as well, and I'm looking forward to that.
Well, Derrell, I am excited to hopefully hear back from you on how things were overseas and maybe incorporate that into next time we talk to see what you were seeing and kind of what they think possibly of the U.S. cattle market. And so as we sum up today's conversation, to give a brief overview, how would you describe the U.S. cattle market currently?
I tell you what, this cattle market is really on fire right now. And again, it's things that we've been talking about for months. The conditions have been building, kind of getting all the pieces in place. But these markets are really strong, and they're going to continue to be strong for the foreseeable future.
And I mentioned the Cow-Calf Corner newsletter that you put out with OSU Extension. If producers would like to go read with that or keep up to date with what's happening, how could they do that?
Yeah, if you'll just Google Beef Extension, Oklahoma State University, or OSU, it should take you to the right link for our Beef Extension programs. There's quite a bit of information on different things in there, but if you look, there's a link to subscribe to the Cow-Calf Corner newsletter.
Derrell, I appreciate you coming on, and I hope you have safe travels as you go experience agriculture other places. Thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Look forward to visiting with you again next time.
That was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. The resources that he mentioned in today's show will be linked in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, and when we come back, we'll be joined with Londa Nwadike as she talks about food safety as it relates to farmers markets and direct-to-consumer sales. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and as we continue today's show, we're joined with K-State and University of Missouri Extension Food Safety Specialist Londa Nwadike. And Londa, first off, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're a food safety specialist, and something when I think of summer, I think of farmers markets and going out to see what everyone has produced and all the cool things they are doing there. And so we want to talk a little bit about the safety of farmers market and direct-to-consumer sales. And so to get started, for producers who want to get started, what are some first steps that you recommend they take if they want to look into direct-to-consumers?
Yeah, so direct-to-consumer sales is a great way for farmers to get started on selling maybe, niche products or selling fruits and vegetables or, selling baked goods or grains or local meats or whatever you might have that might be of interest to, people in your community. But before you do sell those things, it is important to make sure that it's legal to sell those things in the manner that you're selling them. So most products, can be sold at a farmer's market, but you might need a license for some of those products. So you might need to produce that product under inspection. So it just depends. So unfortunately, there's not an easy answer of everything requires a license or everything doesn't. It just depends. So regulators have tried to look at food products to see which ones are the highest risk and which ones are the lowest risk, and then, determine according to that what will require a license and what won't. K-State Research and Extension has a publication that's pretty extensive on information on all the regulations and best practices for food safety. It's number publication MF3138, but it's available through K-State Research and Extension. In other states, the regulations would be similar, but probably not exactly the same. Some of the same principles would be there, but the specifics might be a little different if you're listening in from a different state.
A lot of information. You can really sell most products at a farmer's market. For the most common products that you see in farmer's markets, what are those products and what are a few steps you recommend those producers take?
Fresh fruits and vegetables, for example, let's start with that because that's something that I know I love to go to the farmer's market to buy and, really says summer. So fresh fruits and vegetables, if they're intact, so if they're whole, not peeled, they do not require licensing to sell them. However, we strongly recommend that you get produce safety training to make sure that you're producing those products in as safe a way as possible. And again, K-State Research and Extension, as well as University of Missouri Extension, who I work for as well, we offer lots of different produce safety trainings for growers. Most of them are available for free. We offer them online, but so we have different trainings available. Again, free or online, and we offer some things in person. If there's enough interest, we can do things in person as well, because we really want to make sure that our produce that's produced in the state is as safe as possible to make sure that people aren't getting sick. So that's the first category I'll talk about is fruits and vegetables. Then, things like jams and jellies, if they're like regular sugar levels, if it's just strawberry jams and jellies, fruit jams and jellies, you could do that at home. That does not require licensing. So you could make those and sell those at home. Once you get into like jalapeno jams and jellies, that's a little more complicated. And if you're doing pickles, that requires inspection and requires some extra training. Baked goods, if it's things that don't require refrigeration for safety, then they would not require licensing. You could bake those at home in your regular home kitchen and sell those. But again, if you get into things like cheesecake that need refrigeration for safety, that does require licensing. So you couldn't just make that in your home kitchen and sell that.
A lot of different things you mentioned, and we'll link those publications in today's show notes on agtoday.net. And as someone who's been to farmers markets, I love going to ask questions to the people who are there. And so if producers are listening and they're like, they might be concerned with what people might ask them, what are a few common questions they have?
For myself, a lot of times you want to just make sure that they are in fact raising that, or if they're not raising it, that they know where that food was raised, because some farmers markets do allow people to resell their products, and that's a whole nother topic. But as a consumer, consumers can ask, the producer questions. Producers can expect that consumers might ask questions about where it's raised, how it's raised, are you using chemicals when you're raising it? Are you using pesticides? Are you using, if it's meat products, are you using antibiotics? So those are the type of questions that consumers will quite often ask. And sometimes consumers might just have questions about, the seasonality of products, particularly fruits and vegetables. A lot of consumers might think they can find a fresh local watermelon, in May, and that's probably not going to happen. So consumers probably have a wide range of questions. We have some other resources too that I just thought of. So K-State and MU and Nebraska and Iowa, we have a joint website called Seasonal and Simple. And for fruits and vegetables in particular, that website provides storage information, recipes for using, artichokes to zucchini. It provides information where you can buy those things, and then just also the nutritional facts and the seasonality calendar is what made me think of it, to help consumers understand, like in general, asparagus is in May and sweet corn is more like July, so to help consumers understand that seasonality. So those are some of those questions that producers might get. And yeah, what do you do with artichokes? I've never cooked with them before. So again, that website can help provide you as a farmer information to give to your consumer about what to do with that artichoke when you get it home.
And Londa, we're talking specifically at farmers markets right now, but I kind of want to pivot towards, I've driven by stands on the side of the roads that really kind of go with the honor system. So what's that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So regulatory wise, from a food safety regulatory wise, all direct to consumer sales would be considered in the same category. So even though it's the honor system, I mean, it's still like, actually, I should probably ask, I think that's still considered a direct to consumer sale. You're not selling to a grocery store and then the grocery store is selling it. You're selling, to the consumer. So producers would need to follow those same regulations as in that MF 3138 publication I mentioned earlier. Yeah, and those can be a great way to get, for producers to sell their foods and for local consumers to get access to more local, healthy foods. But again, the consumer should be thinking through, like if a consumer goes to one of those roadside stands and sees like chopped watermelon, for example, that would be a concern. Or chopped is maybe not the right word, sliced, that would be a concern. I would not, unless it's, very well iced down and unless it's very cold. But, if you're seeing whole intact produce, if it's clean, again, that we have a publication MF 3136, which is for consumers, to give them tips on purchasing products from farmers markets and direct to consumer sales, kind of questions they should ask and things they should look for. So, and we have a website with lots of other information for farmers markets and direct to consumer sales that can help on both sides, both purchasing and selling.
And one more direct to consumer thing that I kind of want to touch on is a lot of producers, I've seen it specifically come out recently, or specifically come out in the past few years, especially with COVID, was selling their meat directly to consumers. And so what are a few things that you really want producers to know before they may even choose to navigate that source of income?
So yes, direct to consumer meat sales, we are covered in that publication that I mentioned also. The big thing that I can think of off the top of my head is the cold chain, making sure that you're able to keep that product cold throughout. It's assuming it's a fresh product. If you're selling jerky or something, that's different, of course. But if you're selling fresh meat, you've got to make sure that you're able to keep a cold chain from the time that you're, getting it home from the facility to the time that it's getting to the consumer. And yes, there are, regulations that you need to follow as well, just to make sure that we're selling safe, wholesome products in Kansas. We just would never want any bad outcome associated with, any sort of food products that are sold in Kansas. So we want to make sure we're just doing it in the safest way possible. So yeah, just making sure that you're following those regulations. We have fact sheets also on food labeling to provide information. And we even do have a fact sheet too to help consumers understand the different terms that they might see on a meat product label. So just helping them to understand, what does cage-free eggs mean? What does organic mean? What does GMO-free mean? And just some of those different topics. And our colleagues in animal science extension, they put together a lot of great fact sheets over the years on helping consumers understand how many pounds of meat you can expect if you're buying a steer, how many pounds of meat to expect, and that sort of thing. So there's some good resources available on that topic too.
Londa, I appreciate you coming in and sharing yourself as a resource, but also all the different resources that are provided for producers and consumers to look at if they're looking to direct to consumer sales. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Kansas State University and University of Missouri Extension Food Safety Specialist Londa Nwadike with information about farmers markets and direct-to-consumer sales. The resources that she mentioned in today's show you can find on agtoday.net in the show notes, where you can also find the full show. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be joined with Joe Gerken as he discusses summer fish kills. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we finish our Monday show with some wildlife information, specifically summer fish kills. And in to talk about it, we have K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. So people are finding dead fish in their pond?
Yeah, so I've been getting a lot of calls. Seemingly out of nowhere, people are going out to their ponds and seeing dead fish. And when I say dead fish, I mean thousands of dead fish. Almost every fish in their pond has died in some instances.
Definitely something shocking if you were to walk out and see all the fish in your pond dead. What causes that?
Well, there are a few causes of fish kills in Kansas or in ponds. And, you could have something like a catastrophic event, runoff from herbicide or chemicals. But by far the most common reason is low oxygen levels. So fish need about 5 to 6 parts per million of oxygen in their water. In certain times of the summer, those numbers can plummet, and that causes the fish, just like if we didn't have oxygen, causes the fish to die. So it seemingly happens out of nowhere, but there are some signs leading up to that point.
And is there something that's plants that also could cause fish to pass away?
Sure. So part of the plant cycle, plants during the day are photosynthesizing. They're getting light from the sun. At night, that light goes away, so photosynthesis stops. So during the day, plants are giving off oxygen. They're adding that to the pond. At night, they're taking in oxygen and using it up. So most of these fish kills that we see occur overnight. Oxygen levels are generally lowest right before the sun comes up in the morning. So you see these fish kills, you wake up, cup of coffee, and you go out, your pond is covered in dead fish. Not quite the way you want to enjoy that cup of coffee.
So what can people do about it?
Well, a few different things. Most of these fish kills are caused by stratification in a pond. And so if you've ever been in a pond or a lake and you're walking along and you feel your feet get cold, people a lot of times say, hey, I found a spring. And that's true sometimes, but more often what happens is they've found the hypolimnion. They found a deeper area of water. And water, when it is at different temperatures, it separates. It separates like oil and vinegar would. So even though it's still water, they're different temperatures, they don't mix. So you end up with a deep layer that isn't exchanging oxygen with the atmosphere. And you end up with the top layer that can have waves and we can get oxygen that way. So that deep layer where you quote unquote found that spring can become unoxygenated and the top layer will have oxygen in it. So what causes a fish kill is when you get a mixing. And so a big event like a rainstorm or something comes in, thunderstorms a lot of times, they mix up the deep layer that doesn't have oxygen with the top layer that does, and now everywhere just has a little bit of oxygen, and nowhere can support those fish, and that causes those fish to die.
Can people remove plants or the plants in the pond to help eliminate that issue?
A few different things. One is be proactive. So put something like an aerator into your system to keep all of that water mixed up. That's where I was going with that stratification. If you can add aeration and keep your pond mixed up, that'll help with your fish. Another thing with the plants are generally good. They're adding oxygen during the day. When we start to see problems is when we do things like we see a phytoplankton die-off. And that can be a commonly, naturally occurring thing, or it can be a side effect from spraying herbicide. A lot of people are going out to their ponds thinking they're helping the situation and killing filamentous algae, or what a lot of people call pond moss. And if you do that during the summer, warmer water holds less oxygen. When that plant material dies, it tends to sink to the bottom, bacteria eat it up, and that uses up a lot of oxygen. So be smart about how you're applying herbicide, add some aeration to your system, and then just, be observant. If you're seeing things that are different, if you're seeing fish start to gulp for air, that is a signal that there's probably a problem. You'd want to give your local extension agent or me a call right away. There are some things to do if we can catch it early. If we wait too long, there's not much we can do once those fish are on their way to no oxygen.
And if the fish have passed away in someone's pond, is there a cleanup process they need to take care of?
Yeah, so it's ideal to get as many fish out of the pond as you can, but not really. Mother Nature has a pretty good job of having a cleanup crew come take care of things. So if you feel inclined, if you don't like the look of it, you can go pull those fish out and dispose of them in a compost pile. Mother Nature will clean it up for you. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting all the fish out of the pond.
And for someone who's wanting to find out more information, you mentioned it slightly, extension agents or yourself?
So definitely reach out to your local extension agent. I'm always here to help. One of the other questions I get is the water safe? And the water's generally safe for livestock and for humans to play around in. It just has low oxygen. But if you have more questions, reach out to your local agent or reach out to me.
Joe, thank you for coming in and sharing some information about summer fish kills.
Thank you for having me.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. That concludes today's programming, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.